Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. Today I want to talk about New Mexico's public health order that just purported to ban the open and concealed carrying of firearms. Now, I'm Canadian, so I'm kind of familiar with governments just decreeing things to be banned. But the US has the Second Amendment, which means that gun ownership and various gun use is a constitutionally protected right and shouldn't be subject to this kind of thing. So let's have a look at this order. Let's talk about it because there's a whole lot of crazy in it and a whole lot of dumb. And we'll talk about some of the implications and just how badly this is going for them. All right, so this is the order. And it says, and I'm going to just sort of skip over parts of it, but it says, whereas gun violence and drug abuse currently constitute statewide public health emergencies, as defined in the Public Health Emergency Response Act. So you see here that once they've sort of opened this door with public health emergencies, they can start calling all sorts of things a public health emergency. Drug abuse is a public health emergency. Crime is a public health emergency. That's really not what people were thinking of with these kinds of things. But once you give the government a tool, a lever, they're going to start trying to use it in all sorts of places. And I know there's going to be plenty of people who think that this is fine because they agree with the underlying idea of restricting firearms, but you need to think about the other implications of what happens if this is acceptable, because they're attacking a constitutionally protected right. It continues on here. It says, whereas the New Mexico Department of Health possesses legal authority pursuant to the Public Health Act and various other things, and inherent constitutional police powers of the New Mexico state government to preserve and promote public health and safety, to maintain and enforce rules for the control of a condition of public health importance. And now you'll note, none of those things, precisely zero of them, trump the Constitution of the United States. In fact, they're all subordinate to the Constitution of the United States, but they're trying to invoke that as their grounding here. So, whereas temporary firearm restrictions, drug monitoring, and other public safety measures are necessary to address the current public health emergencies. Now, let's just talk about the temporary a little later, because we're going to just put a little flag on that we're coming back to it. Temporary, huh? Governments promise temporary powers all the time, and they often don't turn out to be temporary in the slightest. Do you think that this government that thinks that all of these things are a good idea is going to be like, oh yeah, we're done. We're gonna just make them go away now? Is that really what governments do? How many times have you seen a government give up special powers that they've been awarded? Yeah, I can't think of any either. So, therefore, I, pursuant to the full scope of emergency powers under the All Hazard Emergency Management Act, do hereby declare that gun violence and drug use constitute conditions of public health importance as defined in, and they quote the law there, or they cite to it, and hereby order and direct as follows. So here's the rules that they want to impose. So first, no person other than a law enforcement officer or licensed security officer shall possess a firearm as defined in the law, either openly or concealed, within cities or counties averaging 1,000 or more violent crimes per 100,000 residents per year since 2021, according to the FBI Uniform Crime Reporting Program, and more than 90 firearm-related emergency department visits per 100,000 residents, according to the New Mexico Department of Public Health. So, apparently if you want to follow this law, you have to be really up on your local statistics. That's weird. So there's some exceptions here, and you're going to see they're fairly narrow. A, on private property owned or immediately controlled by the person. B, on private property that is not open to the public with the express permission of the person who owns or immediately controls such property. C, while on the premises of a licensed firearm dealer or gunsmith for the purpose of lawful transfer or repair of a firearm. D, while engaged in the legal use of a firearm at a properly licensed firing range or sport shooting competition venue. Or E, while traveling to or from a location listed in paragraphs 1 through 4 of this section, provided that the firearm is in a locked container or locked with a firearm safety device that renders the firearm inoperable, such as a trigger lock. Now, I can already see some giant glaring problems with this. Let's say you're out hunting and you decide to go from one hunting site, which is not listed there, it's public property, to another hunting site, but it requires you to cross through some town that meets these criteria. Well, that sounds like you're violating this law in a way that is dumb. So, the New Mexico Regulation and Licensing Department shall conduct monthly inspections of licensed firearm dealers in the state to ensure compliance with all sales and storage laws. I'm just going to tell you now, you ain't got enough people for that. I just know you don't. So there's a lot of gun dealers, and I'm sure that you don't have the resources to actually do that. The Department of Health shall, within 20 days, compile and issue a comprehensive report on gunshot victims presenting in hospitals in New Mexico, which shall include, if available, demographic data of gunshot victims, including age, gender, race, and ethnicity, data on gunshot victims' healthcare outcomes, the brand and caliber of the firearm used, the general circumstances leading to the injury, the impact of gunshot victims on New Mexico's healthcare system, and any other pertinent information. Of course, who decides what's pertinent? But I can just tell you the reason why they want this is they want to gather information to try to justify further bans. And some of this information is going to be awful. The age of the gunshot victim. Okay, you can probably get a pretty good read on that. But the brand and caliber of the firearm used? Caliber you'll be able to get sometimes if they extract the round and send it off to an expert to have it analyzed. But the brand of firearm used? I'm going to tell you, there's going to be a lot of, it was metal, or a lot of people saying, yeah, it was a Glock. Because lots of people identify every handgun as a Glock. This information is going to be just absolutely useless outside of like the statistics of the people who were shot. So, yeah. No person other than a law enforcement officer or licensed security officer shall possess a firearm on state property, public schools, and public parks. Now, I just wonder, is it legal to hunt on state property in New Mexico? Because if it is, that's a problem. Now, here we get into something that is absolutely idiotic. And, yeah. The New Mexico Department of Health and the New Mexico Environmental Department shall develop a program to conduct wastewater testing for illicit substances, such as fentanyl, at all public schools. So, they want your children's pee, is what this comes down to. They want to test the pee that comes out of schools to see if it's got fentanyl in it or other drugs. Now, here's the problem. You can't tell from that whether that's a legitimate use or an illegitimate use. If a child is dealing with a serious health condition and has been prescribed a fentanyl patch and is using that in accordance with directions, well, that just shows up as fentanyl. The other problem is, how do you get good testing on concentrations? Because if you're trying to determine how much fentanyl, as opposed to either just yes or no, because, I mean, we've already determined that the yes or no is not useful. You could have a single person who is prescribed that, and it might not be a kid. It might be one of the teachers who has a fentanyl patch to deal with. You know, maybe they're Mr. White trying to teach chemistry while dealing with cancer and have a fentanyl patch to deal with some of the pain. You're just going to get, yes, okay, we've got some fentanyl that's present. And if you're trying to do concentration amounts, well, how do you know how long I ran the tap when I washed my hands? How do you know how, all of this makes zero sense whatsoever. This is absolutely idiotic. And I mean, all of this is idiotic, but the Children, Youth, and Families Department shall immediately suspend the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative and evaluate juvenile probation protocols. Okay, so we're just going to start really wrenching around with the judicial system and see what breaks. 7, the Department of Public Safety shall dispatch additional officers and resources to Bernalillo County and work with the Albuquerque Police Department and Bernalillo County Sheriff to determine the best use of those resources. Well, I'm going to tell you, it's not testing kids' pee, because that's not a good use of their resources. Just as a hint, if you were wondering. Clearly, you didn't ask anybody before you did this, but the Department of Public Safety shall coordinate with local law enforcement agencies and the district attorney's offices. Oh, we're going to get to that. And assist in apprehension of individuals with outstanding arrest warrants. Are you saying you weren't trying to apprehend people with outstanding arrest warrants? That's normally what an arrest warrant means. So they have some further directions here, and some of them are kind of funny. One of them just says we're going to pass out lots of copies of this. That's fine. Here's one that not a lot of people should complain about. You know, it just says trigger locks shall be made available free of charge to all firearm owners. Everybody likes something free, right? Provided that each firearm owner shall only be entitled to one free trigger lock. You know, for your one gun. Because I've only got... Oh, wait, no, I've got like dozens. Firearm owners wishing to obtain a free trigger lock should call, and they provide a number, or email, and they provide an email address. Now, first of all, a lot of gun owners are going to be rightly suspicious of this because they're going to say, hey, if I call in, I bet I end up on a list where they're going to, you know, have me tracked. But I'm not worried if New Mexico puts me on a list, so I called, and this is what you get.
The number you have called is not assigned. Please check the number and try the call again. Le numéro de téléphone que vous avez composé n'est pas attribué.
So, yeah. Apparently, that number just does not exist, and that just really shows you how much thought they put into this whole thing. It goes on to say, any person or entity who willfully violates this order may be subject to civil administrative penalties available at law. Now, willfully is fun here because willfully violates this order implies a certain level of knowledge, and you have to know things about statistics. I think this one's going to be hard. I think a lot more people are going to carelessly violate this order rather than willfully. So this order shall take effect on September 8th, which is when they pronounced it, and remain in effect for the duration of the public health emergencies declared in the executive orders and any subsequent renewals of those public health emergency declarations or unless otherwise rescinded. Now, do you think crime is going to stop anytime soon? Or people are just going to go, you know what, fentanyl, we're not... It was fun for a while, but we're going to give up on that. No, they're going to keep this going for forever. Should any provision of this order or its application to any person or circumstances be held invalid by a court of law, the remainder of this order or the application of its provisions to other persons or circumstances shall remain in full force and effect. Okay, so let's talk about why it might be held to be invalid. And oh right, that would be because it is a blatant violation of the U.S. Constitution, specifically the Second Amendment. And now, again, a lot of people who are watching this might say, you know what, I don't care that much about the Second Amendment. I don't carry firearms. I don't believe in carrying firearms. I don't believe in owning firearms. So all of this does not bother me in the slightest. But if they can just declare a public health emergency and therefore suspend a constitutionally protected right, if that's found to be okay, what stops them from suspending other constitutionally protected rights? Like, say, freedom of speech. You know, listen, people are saying things that we disagree with and that are maybe even dangerous in the confines of this public health emergency. So we need to stop them from saying it and throw them in jail if they say the wrong thing. What about, I don't know, quartering of soldiers? Doesn't come up a whole lot, but let's say they say there's a public health emergency. We're bringing in soldiers to help deal with it, and they're going to stay in your home, and they're going to sleep in your bed and your kid's bed, and you can sleep in the garage, but you also are required to feed them. Does that sound like fun? Because, yeah, how about just that they need grounds to arrest you? Could they just start arresting people and detaining them because it's a public health emergency? What about, say, equal protection under the law? Do you not think that some government might decide to use this against, say, black people or gay people? Because I could see it. I think it's pretty much guaranteed that at some point, some government, if they think they can, will try it, because that's what governments do. This should be opposed by all sorts of people because it's a terrible idea. In fact, it is so terrible that David Hogg, who is very rarely in the same place as a good idea, came out and basically said this is too far. A lot of people have said that this is too far, but they have said, the government there has said, you know what, we're going to defend this. We think that this is proper. But you know how they mentioned the Attorney General or the DAs? Well, this is just an example of how badly this is going, because there is a letter from the Office of the Attorney General, Raul Torres, Attorney General. And I'm just going to say, Mr. Torres is a stand-up person. I'm just going to say it here right now. Let's have a look. We're going to read through this because, yeah. So it starts out by referring to some of the cases challenging this. Now, I'm not going into those cases in this video, but it is important to see that this decision is already being challenged. National Association for Gun Rights versus Grisham. Blaz versus Grisham. Donk versus Grisham. We the Patriots USA versus Grisham. Lots of people are lining up to say, this is unconstitutional and we're taking you to court. So who isn't going to court? Well, the Attorney General, because it says, Dear Governor Lujan Grisham, I am writing to inform you that my office will not defend your administration in the above referenced cases challenging the public health emergency order imposing temporary firearm restrictions, drug monitoring, and other public safety measures, the emergency order, issued by the Secretary of Health on September 8, 2023. Though I recognize my statutory obligation, i.e. imposed by law, as New Mexico's chief legal officer to defend state officials when they are sued in their official capacity, my duty to uphold and defend the constitutional rights of every citizen takes precedence. Simply put, I do not believe that the emergency order will have any meaningful impact on public safety, but, more importantly, I do not believe it passes constitutional muster. As a career prosecutor, I have grieved with too many victims of gun violence in New Mexico not to share your anger and frustration at the unacceptable toll that gun violence has exacted, especially among the youngest members of our community. The tragic deaths of 5-year-old Galilea Samaniego in a recent drive-by shooting and 11-year-old Froilan Villegas in a road rage incident should serve as a wake-up call to everyone. However, I encourage you to engage in a more thoughtful and deliberative process with members of the New Mexico legislature rather than taking unilateral action that infringes on the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens while having little, if any, discernible impact on the underlying dynamics driving gun violence in our community. So you can see, clearly not a fan of guns in any event, right? And is actually suggesting gun restrictions through the legislature, but is saying this is clearly unconstitutional. And when the Attorney General is not just saying that it's unconstitutional, but is saying, I will not defend you, that is an incredible step. I can't recall seeing that before. So the emergency order prohibits the possession of a firearm for anyone other than law enforcement and security officers, except on private property owned by the person or with express consent of the owner, on the premises of a firearms dealer or gunsmith for lawful transfer repair, at a licensed firing range or sport shooting venue, or while traveling to those locations with the firearm kept in a locked container or locked with a firearm safety device. In short, the order prevents individuals from carrying firearms in public for the purpose of self-defense. The attempted reach of this order, despite currently being limited to Bernalillo County, is highly problematic because it purports to alter lawful firearm possession in ways that are inconsistent with the federal and state constitutions. I.e., this is completely unconstitutional and you have no right to do this. I agree with the need to start a debate about the devastating impact that gun violence is having on our citizens, especially our children. But the issuance of an executive order in violation of core constitutional principles is not the appropriate method for bringing about such a debate, and its flawed legal foundation is likely to obscure rather than highlight meaningful solutions. In fact, the pushback against this, I think that by the end of it, whatever proposals Ms. Grisham wants to put forward for any sort of gun restrictions are not going to go anywhere. I don't think that Ms. Grisham's career is going to go very far at this point. This is crazy. First, the order's reliance on the Public Health Emergency Response Act distorts that law's meaning beyond its intended purpose of protecting the public from the imminent threat of exposure to an extremely dangerous condition or a highly infectious or toxic agent, including a threatening communicable disease. It's intended for like biological warfare or plagues or chemical warfare, something like that. Second, simply rebranding gun violence as a public health emergency will not satisfy the heightened judicial standard for justifying the blanket prohibition against any citizen, regardless of criminal conduct or intent, from carrying a firearm for personal protection. And there's been a number of cases recently that have highlighted that that is a right that is protected in the US. While no one doubts the devastating impact that gun violence has had on our community over the last several years, it is not clear that the problem is properly defined as a public health emergency, as that term is used within the PHERA. In fact, the likely outcome of pushing this to a court would be to get a court to think that that particular law is a problem. Moreover, even if the problem is properly categorized as a public health emergency, the data do not support the conclusion that gun violence in our community is attributable to otherwise law-abiding citizens exercising their constitutional right to carry firearms for protection outside the home. And this is something I see as a criminal defense lawyer all the time. There's tons of sort of the law-abiding citizens who go target shooting, and they're not the ones doing drive-bys. I've never seen somebody whose hobbies were both target shooting and drive-bys, or target shooting and dealing fentanyl. They're just two very different groups with very different purposes, and they have no overlap. As the former Bernalillo County District Attorney, I agree with your assessment that responsible gun owners are certainly not our problem, and have never been our problem. Given that only responsible gun owners are likely to abide, much less recognize your ban, and drug dealers are just, they don't pay attention to this. They might see it on the news, but they're not going to care. It is unclear how this action will lead to a measurable decline in gun violence in our community. The guys who are not caring about the laws that say that you can't deal fentanyl or that you can't have a drive-by don't care about these rules in the slightest. Moreover, considering the extraordinary resistance that many citizens had to certain public health restrictions during the recent COVID pandemic, I believe it is unwise to stretch the definition of a public health emergency to encompass something that is fundamentally a public safety issue. And in fact, this was one thing that many people said during COVID was, we are concerned that they're going to, that now that they've got all these powers, that they're going to abuse them. And this is clearly an abuse. This is what people were worried about. So, and I know there's going to be lots of people who said, I supported the COVID restrictions, but did you support them being a sort of master key for getting around the Constitution? Because I bet that wasn't on your dance card. However, even if the courts agree with that classification and accept the premise that the ban on any person carrying weapons outside the home is deemed to be sufficiently tailored to address that concern, so even if they accept your BS argument, because it's a BS argument, it is a near certainty that the emergency order will still be found to violate both the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution and Article 2, Section 6 of the New Mexico Constitution. The Second Amendment secures the right of the people to keep and bear arms, and the United States Supreme Court has clarified that individual self-defense is the central component of the Second Amendment right. So, yeah, that's very much clear at this point There are several decisions. They're relying on McDonald, but they also cite Heller and Bruin. So, yeah. Moreover, the Second Amendment right is fully applicable to the states. Although the Second Amendment right is not unlimited, it is among those fundamental rights necessary to our system of ordered liberty. Laws may appropriately regulate the right, but may not infringe upon the right of an ordinary, law-abiding citizen to carry handguns publicly for their self-defense. And that's from Bruin. The New Mexico Constitution likewise secures the right to keep and bear arms. New Mexico's provision specifically applies to security and defense, as well as to lawful hunting, recreational use, and other lawful purposes. So this is laying out, I have an obligation to the Constitution, and you're not following it. The Bruin Court emphasized that the importance of a governmental objective is irrelevant to the constitutionality of a state's regulation of firearms. It doesn't matter how important it is. You can say it's really, really urgent, and that still doesn't get you past the issue. If the regulation interferes with an individual's right to armed self-defense, it is presumptively unconstitutional and can only be upheld if the government is able to affirmatively prove that its firearm regulation is part of the historical tradition that delimits the outer bounds of the right to keep and bear arms. i.e., is there some historical tradition that says that if there's a public health emergency, you can just take it away? I don't think they're going to find that. As indicated above, the novel reclassification, novel is a term that you use in law as shade. You don't describe something as novel as a compliment. If I say opposing counsel has made a novel argument, I am not complimenting them. I'm saying that their argument is probably garbage. It's really akin to saying, I think they're just making this up as they go along. That's what novel means in the legal context. The novel reclassification of gun violence as a public health emergency appears to have been adopted as a pretext. Pretext is another of those words that you never use as a compliment. It is legal fighting words, not in the sense of the fighting words doctrine, but in the sense of if you're calling something a pretext, you're saying it's real bad. To apply the extraordinary but narrowly prescribed powers of the Public Health Emergency Response Act to prohibit all citizens, regardless of their criminal intent or conduct, to possess firearms in public. Unfortunately, it is the very novelty of this approach that places it outside the historical tradition of gun regulation in this country, and thus unlikely to survive judicial scrutiny. For these reasons, my office cannot undertake a defense of the emergency order, and though we will provide a limited commission for your administration to defend these actions in the above referenced cases, I strongly encourage you to consider whether the time and energy dedicated to its defense might be better utilized in the development of a comprehensive legislative response to the problem of gun violence for the New Mexico legislature to consider during the upcoming session. I.e., did you maybe want to find a clue? Take the hint. We are hinting super strongly. In fact, it's not even really a hint. We are loudspeakering super strongly. Listen. New Mexicans recognize there is no single solution to our public safety challenges. Instead, there is a common understanding that we must address multiple issues simultaneously and comprehensively to make a meaningful impact. We need, among other things, more and better trained police officers, stricter gun laws, and tougher guidelines for pretrial detention, robust mental health and drug treatment, rehabilitation programs to reduce recidivism, real-time data on gun crimes and gun trafficking, and a protective services framework that keeps today's child victims from maturing into the next generation's repeat offenders. Our collective efforts, and most of what they say here I would agree with. I'm not a big fan of the stricter gun laws, but better trained police officers. I don't know that the problem is more, but better trained, absolutely. Robust mental health and drug treatment, you bet. Rehabilitation programs, absolutely. Once you've got somebody who is sort of on a bad path, how do you get them off that path? Well, because that can have a tremendous impact in terms of preventing further crime. lots of these things are good proposals. I agree with a lot of it, even though I don't think politically me and this individual sit on the same side of many tables. So, our collective efforts should thus be engaged in a robust dialogue around each of these issues, building consensus that challenges the status quo and harnessing our once-in-a-generation budget surplus to bring about transformative change. It's like, we have all of this money to do something useful, and you want to blow it on this crap. This can only occur through the legislative process and will only occur through your committed and energetic leadership. This is like your work gives you a bonus and you've got like, you know, yay, we've got $5,000 extra. We can put in some repair on the car. We can catch up on our mortgage payments. We can, you know, all of these things. And then you find out that your spouse took the money and like put racing stripes on the car. You're like, but the car doesn't even run. We could have gotten the car fixed. They're like, but racing stripes. These are the racing stripes of the law. So this can only occur through the legislative process and will only occur through your committed and energetic leadership. I'm not seeing a lot of leadership here. While I understand that frustration may have led you to undertake a unilateral approach to addressing the heart-wrenching challenge of gun violence in our community, I urge you to reconsider this course of action and redouble your efforts to bring about lasting change through the democratic process. And this is not the democratic process that they're doing. They're just declaring this. I can and will commit the resources of the Attorney General's office to such an endeavor and stand ready to assist you in building a safer community without sacrificing the constitutional rights which we have sworn an oath to preserve, protect, and defend. So I'm going to give this guy props, notwithstanding the fact that, as I mentioned, you know, he and I likely strongly disagree on some of the gun control measures and all of that. But I will give him props for the whole thing of saying, like, listen, you've asked me to defend this, but it's unconstitutional, and I won't do that. I will give a tip of the hat to any sort of public official when they recognize that the Constitution is their highest responsibility. So, little tip of the hat to this person. But at the end of the day, I think this is extremely concerning, and I have a cynical supposition or cynical guess as to what they're doing. I think that they had to have talked to a lawyer, and asked, hey, how's this going to hold up? And that lawyer had to have told them, not in the slightest. But it's great PR. I mean, if they're running on an anti-gun platform, they can now say, look at what I tried to do. And look at what the bad gun groups told me I couldn't do. And then, I mean, this is basically, if that's the goal, then that would be basically spending public funds on a re-election campaign. And I'm just cynical to think that that's a real possibility. I don't know, but it seems like a possible explanation for this, because sober thought does not appear to be an explanation for this. This does not make a whole lot of sense. And this should be concerning, as I've said, not just to gun owners. This should be concerning to everyone who enjoys the rights that are guaranteed to them under the United States Constitution. So, and even if you don't live in New Mexico, this can affect you, because if you live in, I don't know, Washington State, well, maybe your government sees this happening and decides to be next. Maybe you live in a, another state where they're going to try to suppress some other right that you enjoy. Freedom of speech is a popular choice in this. Maybe they want to suspend elections. You know what? We've got too much stuff. We're just going to call off the election. Would you be okay with that? Because you shouldn't be okay with that. Anyway, those are my thoughts. There's a bunch of those cases on the go. I'm going to be doing some coverage on those. But for right now, I wanted to talk about this order and just how messed up it is. So thank you for watching. If you have questions comments, that sort of thing, leave them in the comment section below. I'm going to have a read. I can't always respond to them, but I will try to read over them and just, it'll guide some of what I talk about in future, because if there are questions out there, I try to answer them. If you like this, please like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to see more content like this, hit all the buttons. And I also want to thank my Patreon supporters. There's a link to that in the description below. At the $50 level, the CCFR, Canada's National Firearms Association, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, as well as Lembas for the Elf. I love that name. And at the $20 level, we have Lindsay Metcalf, Larry Kalniak, Here's a Coin, Legal Witcher, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsich, Vicky, and Dorky Dane. Thank you as well to my $10 supporters who will be in the crawl immediately following, as well as all other supporters of this channel. Thank you for watching. Hope this has armed you with knowledge. See you next time.